Friends, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for the gift of this day, for our time together. We ask that you might bless us in all that we undertake, that we might come to know and to love you more fully through the study of your holy word. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Friends, a warm welcome to Canon Jimmy Hartley. He is the Bishop's Canon for Christian Formation and Congregational Vitality, and our guest preacher today. So that's a lot of fun.
And he did well.
And he did well. Comes at 8 o'clock, they'll tell you the truth. But
so if you come at 10:30, you won't tell the truth?
That's right. Only the 8 o'clockers do. 8 o'clock is actually harder to preach at than 10:30 because everyone's so quiet. Like you could give the greatest sermon ever. Or the worst sermon ever, which is kind of nice, I guess, and still, which is great. So, we're going to start looking at Genesis chapter 6, which is kind of a weird chapter.
I want to ask you a question before you go on.
Sure.
That chapter. I think it's chapter 5. When you're talking about the different generations or the different begats, all the things like that, they talk about starting with Adam, Seth, and going on, and they lived so many years. It looked like, I have two questions. It looked like the years that these people were, how old they were, and having a son kept getting shorter and shorter and shorter.
I think that's right.
So, was it just that, I mean, I could see Adam because Seth was, he had the other two. But I just thought that was, I know this sounds weird, I thought it was kind of funny that they just kept getting it. But the other thing, in verse 21, it talks about Enoch. He's the only one that says he walked with God.
Yeah, so he walked with God and was no more.
Right. So, what is that?
So that is kind of a Jewish euphemism for dying. It's kind of a beautiful...
I understood it.
So, Enoch in chapter 5 talks about Enoch walked with the Lord and then was no more. And it's kind of a Hebrewism for dying.
Well, I just wondered that if he was more in tune with God than the others, because it didn't say anything about them. It just said they lived, thus all the days of so-and-so's life was 905 years, and he died.
So there is a certain tradition that there are a few people who didn't have to go through physical death but went to heaven, body and soul.
Okay.
And so those people are, who's the best, holiest, most beautiful lady in the whole Bible? Mary, right? Mm-hmm. Mary assumed body and soul into heaven. You get that with Roman Catholic tradition and some Anglicans. The Orthodox talk about the dormition of the Theotokos. They talk about Mary just going to sleep in the Lord but not dying, which is slightly different but similar. Who gets carried up in a chariot of fire?
It's Old Testament.
It is.
Elijah?
It was Elijah, right? With the chariot of fire. And then the other one that sometimes you'll hear a tradition around is Enoch, being kind of spirited away by the Lord and not actually dying.
It was just interesting that the verbiage changed.
Yeah. But I think probably to me, the natural reading to that is that he just died.
Okay.
But kind of died in a state of
So he
friendship with
wasn't
God.
any more special than the others.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll say also the genealogy is really important. Like, no one likes reading the genealogies, right? They're not interesting or fun, exciting. But in them, you'll get Adam and Jesus linked in a direct chain of descendants, which is important because it shows that Jesus is connected to each and every person who's ever lived or will ever live.
Was King David's genealogy?
Absolutely. So to get the full genealogy, you'll pull bits from Genesis. You're going to pull some bits, I think, from Leviticus or Deuteronomy. I can't remember which. Do you remember which, Jimmy?
I think it's Deuteronomy.
I think it's Deuteronomy, but it could be Leviticus, oddly enough. And then you'll also get it at the beginning of Matthew's Gospel account as well. And Matthew really concerned about the fulfillment of prophecy and kind of dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. And so kind of really hammers home and makes that point in the beginning. So chapter 6 kind of starts with a weird story. That's not a full story, but kind of just a fragment of a story. So humankind had had some trouble since the fall and their removal from Eden. But they were, shockingly enough, able to keep the commandment to be fruitful and to multiply. That's one they were really good at, to find out, for some reason. And so they did keep that commandment. But even in keeping that commandment, it would seem that all was not well for long. So you get a curious account of the fruitfulness in chapter 6. Now this comes right from my favorite translation of Genesis, which is the Shokin Bible by Everett Fox. It's called the 5 Books of Moses. It's kind of spendy, so if you want to look at it, come borrow mine, because it's probably $50 for the first 5 books. It's really expensive, and that's in paperback. Hardback is probably $100 now. I don't know, it's crazy expensive. Now it was when humans first became many on the face of the soil, and the women were born to them, that the divine beings saw how beautiful the human women were. And so they took to themselves wives. This is the story about the Nephilim, right? It is a unique and a curious story. And it includes the Hebrew phrase, B'nai Ha-Olam, B'nai Ha-Elohim.
Don't we have a choir named that?
So we're changing the name of our choir because I was at the Brett Floyd concert, and someone said, "Oh yeah, B'nai Elohim, it means endless praise or ceaseless praise." But it actually doesn't mean, I didn't think it meant ceaseless praise, and so I went and looked it up when I was getting ready for this, and sure enough, I said, well, it looks to me like it's the same B'nai Elohim, it means sons of God. Then I called Rabbi Case at Tree of Life, at Beth Shalom, to be absolutely certain, and he said, no, it definitely means sons of God. I said, well, is there a Hebrew phrase for endless praise? He's like, there is not a common phrase, but if you'd like, I'm certain I could render it. And he says, of course, maybe you would be better off sticking with a language that everyone just knows. Probably so. We actually have a plaque in the front, in the narthex of the church, that's in Chinese, that a sister congregation gave us years ago. And Shani Dellinger came and visited us one Sunday. And she's from Taiwan, and so she speaks Chinese fluently. It's her first language. And she comes, she goes, what an interesting plaque. Do you know it's upside down? And so she got us to flip it right side up. But it actually, B'nai Elohim actually means sons of God. Now, there is a tradition in the ancient Near East about humans and gods mixing together biologically. You also get it in kind of Greek mythology, Roman mythology. So this kind of story would not have been unique, but been part of the broader tradition of the ancient Near East. It's probably a fragment of some other old story from somewhere else that just got put in. But the broader theological point, again, we've talked about how the Bible is not history qua history, right? So usually you think of history as in 1492, Chris Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and there it is. It's the truth about just what happened and nothing but the facts. Bible's history is not supposed to be that. Biblical history is really concerned about who God is, and who you, as a result of who God is, are supposed to be. Which is a subtle but important difference, right? And so, the theological issue, I think, is important. Yes?
Yeah, because my translation says that basically evil beings from the spirit world were sexually involved with human women, and their children became giants. And,
yeah, so I don't.
God's heart. So it's just very odd.
I think there's clear that there's sinfulness going on here. The scholars I checked in with, and the way I read it is, you see the humans, again, trying to grasp up above their station and become like gods, just like when they were eating the fruit of the tree. I'm not sure that Nephilim necessarily means they were evil. Maybe? And it's a very weird story.
It is
Any insight, Jimmy?
Beyond it being some sort of fragment from some Near Middle East sort of mythology, that I think setting up the flood story that you had on there is really, I think that we're considering that this was an oral tradition that was codified, right? That to be able to give something that gave some relevance culturally to set up why God would do such a thing as to have a flood. It's really the key takeaway.
Yep.
Whether or not the Nephilim were evil or if they were some extra partners of not really supposed to be a part of God's intention on earth or whatnot, which kind of reads into your translation a little bit, I think. But nonetheless, they were something other than the intended order that God created.
It's fragments, it's things like that. What is it, Jimmy Robb and all those where they have like aliens come and they find these little fragments.
Yeah.
And aliens were here and all that. Those crazy different religions.
Yeah.
I believe that they get it off of these little fragments.
I think Jimmy's talking about the takeaway is you see people, again, kind of following God's commandments, but finding a way to be sinful in doing it. Surprise, surprise. So in verses 5 to 9, God then looks at His creation and He sees that humankind's wicked. It's literally the Hebrew word ra'ah here. So mankind is ra'ah. They are evil. It technically means, quote, bad or disagreeable. It's inferior in quality, and by extension it is evil, and it has a wicked ethics. It is disagreeable to God. But probably the harshest, I think, there is disagreeable to God. Right? He looks at humankind and sees that they're disagreeable to God. And then we see here is God's disposition that we all have towards sin. Right? So even after baptism, we talked about concupiscence. Right? We all have a desire to love and to do God, as Paul talks about. But somehow I don't do the things that I know I should do or want to do, but I do the bad anyway. My dog is the perfect example of this. And Jimmy's kids may be the perfect example of this too, who knows. So Daisy will know she's not supposed to do something. And you'll leave her out and you'll walk into another room and she'll start chewing or trying to shred up her blanket a little bit. Because she enjoys doing that from time to time. And then you'll walk back in, and then she'll just put her hands over that spot and just look at you. Like she's not been doing anything, just sitting there waiting for you to come back. Or she'll very quietly walk into the kitchen. And as quietly as she can, try to get up on the countertop to grab a towel or the oven mitt. Like if you know she's being quiet, you know she's secretly probably doing something she's not supposed to be doing. That's why she's being quiet, so that she's not bothering you and you're not paying attention. We all have that kind of that disposition within us. The good news is that God chooses you anyways. We talked last year in the Bible Challenge some about how, and we talked at the beginning of Genesis, how God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit creates, right? Which means Jesus was there in the beginning. And it means God knew that the cross was a necessary feature of creation and loves you so much that He was willing to make you anyways. That's a lot of love, to choose you in that way. So God chooses us and not we who choose God. And then at verse 6, we see that God is, literally in Hebrew, Nakim. God is Nakim, that He has made creation. Chris, how does your Bible have it at 6:6?
6 says, excuse me, and the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart.
To be sorry. Does anyone else's translation have something besides sorry there? Okay. What do you think that's getting at?
I would think he was upset.
Yeah?
No, I mean, in a godly kind of way.
That he'd made a mistake.
Did he make a mistake? Can God make mistakes, though?
Well, no, but I'm
No.
thinking he might have thought he had made a mistake. Or he was sorry that it hurt. Yeah, hurt might be
Didn't
better.
harbor grieve God.
It grieved. I think it definitely grieved him. And kind of going along with that, Cindy, did your parents ever tell you, "I'm not angry with you, I'm just disappointed"?
Yeah.
Right?
That's a comment with an 8-year-old.
Yeah. Do you ever say that to your
Fairly
kid?
often.
I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed.
Oh, just put the guilt trip big.
But somehow that's worse than being angry, isn't it?
Yeah.
The word itself, nakim, means to be sorry, to be moved to pity, to have compassion.
Regret.
Not regret, right? So he's sorry, yes, but not regretful. Like he's not so upset about it he wishes he hadn't created us. But there is a sense of suffering. The word compassion literally means to suffer with. Right? Like co-passion, to suffer with. And so I think we see God feeling kind of acutely that sting of our own disobedience and what that means. And then at verse 7, God says, everything is not lost. Yes, I will blot out from the earth the human beings that I've created, the people together with the animals and the creeping things and the birds of the air, for I am sorry that I've made them. That sounds pretty harsh, doesn't it? Like, that's it. We're doing away with it. But then verse 8 immediately follows, and we see that Noah has found favor in God's sight. Again, the Hebrew is helpful here. You get the Hebrew word hen, which does not imply that Noah is liked by God, or just liked by God, because God likes, quote unquote, his whole creation. If he didn't like it, he didn't love it, he wouldn't have made it. Right? Because God, it wouldn't have made it good. We wouldn't have made it anyways. I mean, because God creates out of freedom. Like, some of us probably go up to work every morning because they want you there and they pay you to come and you got to go, right? Otherwise, no one's waking up early and going to work. But God doesn't have to get up and go about the work of creating. He chooses to do it out of freedom. Instead, we see that God loves his creation and wants to do it. Noah has found favor with God. This begins a pattern of righteous behavior, of people who find favor with God. Who else do you see that with in the Bible? So Moses, yes. Abraham gets his name changed to Abraham,
Yeah.
right?
The whole line going.
Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, kind of the big three there.
Does it go all the way to Jesus?
It does. Now, Jesus doesn't find favor with God like the rest of them because Jesus is God. So he'd be like, I'm pretty pleased with myself. You know, it'd be kind of weird. It'd be a little like hubris, right? Yeah, I am pretty good now that I think about it. But think about his mom Mary again. Full of grace. It's full of God's favor, isn't it? I think the Jerusalem Bible translated as greetings, favored one, who is full of God's favor. Now, the astute amongst you will note that I cut some verses here. There's nothing kind of weird or creepy going on. There's no secret code. Okay, there is, but you have to buy the DVD set to get it. No, we're cutting over the genealogies because we kind of talked a little bit about the big point of those, and there's not a whole lot else there for us. So we press on towards the story of the ark. Now, the ark story is something that's really popular. I think every child hears the ark story and kind of knows the story of the ark. At verse 11, we read that the whole earth is corrupt in God's eyes. Does anyone have something different than corrupt there?
It says rotten to the core.
Rotten to the core. What translation are you using? I like that.
The one that's on
The one on the phone.
Living Bible.
Living Bible? Rotten to the core. Harry, what does yours have?
Trying to let's see. Specifically. Wickedness,
Wicked, rotten, corrupt,
perpetually evil.
perpetually evil. Wow, that's harsh. So the whole earth is corrupt in God's eyes, but the corruption is not the kind of corruption. Yes?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
If God felt like that then, how would you imagine He feels about the earth now?
So I think we have a tendency, I think there's two tendencies people have to either, one, romanticize the good old days. My grandfather to that would always say, yeah, I remember the good old, not so good old days. Like he'd say, you know what, I like color television, I like having a microwave, and owning my own car, and a private phone line, and air conditioning. There's a lot about today to commend itself to you. I think the other tendency we have, though, is to sometimes romanticize people from the past. They were so much better or holier or more faithful than we are. I think people are people. So everyone knows who Queen Victoria was, right? Now, who was her son? Was Edward, right? Anyone remember from history about the Edwardian era and what it was full of? Licentiousness is the polite church word for it, right? There was a story about Edward went to someone's house for a weekend, and they shot and killed like 20,000 quail in one weekend.
Just to do it.
Well, they had a hunting party. That's an insane number of birds for a group of probably 5 or 10 people to shoot in a weekend. Think about how many shots that is.
And they didn't have guns either, did they?
Oh no, they definitely had guns.
They had guns.
They had break-open shotguns, nice English-made over-unders. You had a couple of them, and you'd shoot one and hand it to your man, who'd hand you a new one reloaded. If you're going to do it, that's the way to do it, and that's how you can shoot 20,000 in a weekend. But that kind of consumption, right? You go back a little bit farther, think about Henry VIII, right? He's the king, ostensibly the head of the church.
That's what I was thinking.
I mean, how many wives does this man have? It's like he gets a new one every week.
Yeah. And he didn't like her, he chopped her head off.
Not all of them.
Well, no.
Some he just threw in prison.
Some he just locked up and sent away quietly. So I'm not sure that we are more corrupt than they used to be. I think the difference is that there are more cameras and video recorders now than there used to be, and so we have a stronger sense of what's going on. People know about it in a way that maybe they didn't before.
Communications and social media, the awful things that happened, we didn't necessarily know about in the good old days because we didn't know what was happening in Nigeria or Alabama or whatever. We just
Yeah.
local news now with social media and television and everything. We just see it all and get discouraged. So.
Well, I grew up in a small town. Small towns, you can still get away with this. And I knew the commissioner of the revenue because he was our neighbor. And his cousin was the judge. And his nephew was the clerk of the court.
Absolutely.
And his brother was the just retired chief of police. So Wyatt Lee's the kind of person you want to know. And when my brother and I would get a speeding ticket for driving way too fast, guess who we would call?
The next door neighbor.
We would call Wyatt Lee. And he'd say, well, I'm going to call my brother Otto, former chief of police. Otto's going to call our cousin. And he's going to just take care of it. It's not a big deal.
It's also the fact that we know instantly
Yeah.
that it makes it so much stronger impact on how we feel about things as opposed to, okay, the world didn't end when that happened a month ago.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So kind of the speed of information that maybe increases distance. So that's probably right. Or doxing. Does everyone know what doxing is?
I do now.
It's where you do something wicked on your computer and then someone hacks into your computer, gets the information, and cuts it loose to everyone on the internet. And they're doxing you. They're releasing your documents and papers. Everyone leaves a big digital trail of everything you've ever thought about pretty much now. And so anyone can go in and find everything about you with a little bit of ingenuity and time. That was not possible to do to someone 20 years ago.
They'd be pretty bored.
They'd be pretty bored. It just wasn't possible, though. So I bet that we are not that much worse, honestly, than the people in the ark were.
Thank you.
People are people. We do stuff differently, like no one used to sin online because they couldn't. But they still sinned and still did the same kinds of things. And so, the corruption, though, is not the kind of corruption you get from a mobster, right? Paying out bribes and stuff like that. At verse 12, it's so much stronger. It's, in Hebrew, Vatchkana ha-erzatz lipnei Elohim. The whole of the earth was ruined before God's face. Literally, it was ruined before God's face.
But he knew it was going to happen.
He did, but think about kids again. Kids are such a great example. Don't you know when you have kids that eventually they're going to break into the liquor cabinet? Or eventually they're going to drive crazy fast or get into a fight at school. Like, you know what's going to happen, don't you? But you have them anyways. And you love them anyways.
You can predict it.
You can predict
Because
it.
they're kids.
Yeah. So I think God knew it was going to happen, but I think there's still that sense of loss or sadness that it did. And don't you have that with your kids, or didn't your parents have that with you?
No, I was good.
Well, everyone but Joyce's parents, so I had that.
It was later.
It was later. So God then says, that's it, I've had enough. I'm going to destroy all this flesh and all the bodies on the earth. But God's judgment is limited, isn't it? Because he saves Noah. Goodness, no Moses yet. He saves Noah and Noah's family, and he saves the animals. Thus, Noah is given very specific instructions about how to construct the ark. Literally, it is a tavod in Hebrew. It's this little tavod that's going to get them safely through the flood. This is the same word that appears in Exodus chapter 2. Moses is placed into a tavod, a little tiny basket.
Yeah.
And is sent safely down the stream that God's people might be rescued. It is the provision through this ark, this tavod. What do you think the Ten Commandments dwelt in with the presence of the Lord?
The ark.
The ark, the tavod. Again, if you look forward towards the New Testament and you look at the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament, the word for tavod and the word for womb are related. So even in Jesus, it's through the tavod, an ark, that God is saving his people. I love these images. People have gotten the instructions on how to build the ark from the Bible, and they tried to make, as near as they could, a faithful recreation of what the ark might have looked like. And it kind of gives you somewhat of a sense of the scale of the building project. It is an immense ship. It would have been the size of Titanic, more or less. Right? So it's a massive ship, if you think about it. It would have been a vessel that weighed about 43,000 tons, about 440 by 73 by 44 feet. That makes no sense to me, like how long is 444 feet? That is about 12 school buses long, just a little bit more than 12 school buses parked nose to tail. It would have been more than 7 school buses tall, stacked right on top of one another. and more than 4 school buses wide. Just to give you a sense of what Noah and his family were building. That's a really big boat.
That's a lot of trees.
That's a lot of trees getting cut down. And they didn't even have steel chainsaws. But imagine the work that went into that.
Noah and the 3 sons?
Yeah.
And they had to cut and
Cut,
shave all
and
that
cut,
wood.
and cut, and
Oh,
cut.
Lord.
The other thing is, so growing up, I always thought, well, God tells Noah to make the ark, and then, boom, the rain comes, and the ark is ready. There probably would have been quite a lot of time between starting of the ark and, like, the flood. Like, God had to plan that out a ways in advance to give Noah time to make it. That's helpful, I think, because, at least for me, I get kind of holy impatience. Like, I want things done, but I'd like them done yesterday. And God's timing, I think, doesn't always work maybe as quick as we'd like it to. Have any of you ever experienced that in your lives? No?
You mean holy and patient?
Holy impatience? Where
I'm
you
unholy and impatient a lot when I'm behind the wheel of my car. I can tell you that.
just go up 26 every afternoon, baby.
Fortunately, I only live 3 miles from here. So.
Yeah.
Or 2 nights road.
John's uncle and aunt, when their church went on a trip to that place in Tennessee where they...
Named Jordan.
I'd love to go see it.
Was it cool?
Yeah.
Diocesan road trip.
It's a pilgrimage.
Yeah, I love it. So, the other thing I want to share about you with the ancient biblical flood narrative is that it is not the only flood story, which I think actually leads some credibility to it as a story. If there was a big global or regional flood, people are going to talk about it and write it down, aren't they? Mm-hmm. Think about the flood of 2015. Everyone that lived in Colombia in 2015 has a story about the flood, don't they?
Yeah.
And what was going on and what had happened. And boy, our house didn't get it because we were 1.5 foot higher than our neighbors, but our neighbor's house was completely destroyed and gone, or whatever it is.
And the same thing with the hurricane that just happened.
Yeah, with Florence, people in
people,
Conway
yeah.
and all over the Low Country and up in North Carolina had that same kind of sense about it. It has been told by many people, and it always includes a man escaping along with his family vis-a-vis a giant boat. The closest parallel is the Arthasis and Gilgamesh epics from the ancient Near East and Mesopotamia, probably around 1600 BC. Again, you'll have the same basic bones of the story. The big difference is that in the pagan versions, the gods are irritated by the people's noise and the incessant clamoring and moving about they're doing. And they get so irritated they decide to drown them all. Because what better way to have quiet than to drown everyone? But they didn't want to ruin everything, but they started the flood going and they couldn't stop it. And so they lose control over this whole flooding process. And the gods become really surprised by the outcome of it.
Are you done?
Which is really different than the Christian telling of it, isn't it? And the Jewish telling. Right? How is that different?
Because God was in control of the rain.
God is always in control.
And He had that plan of
40 days and 40 nights it's going to rain.
right.
And sure enough, first morning it starts, and by the 40th night, it's out. No more rain. Okay? What does that say about who God is versus who the pagans understood God to be?
Well, from our understanding, it would be God is God. God is all creation. And that's, we really can't fully understand. You know that better than me, Father. But
So, God, in His creation and in His action, is not limited, right? 2, God's power and knowledge and love is such that things don't run away from Him or get out of control, right? He doesn't lose His temper. The storm doesn't crank up and He can't stop it. You'll see this with Jesus. They're amazed when the disciples think they're all going to drown. What does Jesus say? Oh, fine. Just stop. right? And the storm stops. And they say, who is this man? Who is he? That even the wind and the waves must obey him. The other thing is the pagan gods very much want sacrifice from their people. How about God? Does God desire your sacrifice? No, right? Psalm 50, I desire not sacrifice, but steadfast love. Do you think I drink the blood of goats or eat the flesh of bull rams? No, it's ridiculous. And so the whole ethical outlook of Genesis is different. The flood is not a result of human noise or irritation, but instead it's because of corruption and sinfulness, about how we are running away from God. Secondly, Noah wasn't saved because he made the right sacrifices to the right God at the right time, who fought against the others and saved him. But Noah's family was saved because of their righteousness, because he was blameless before the people. Today's gospel story gives you the story of the children running up to Jesus, and Jesus puts them into his midst. I think of Noah as kind of sprinting towards Jesus. I think it's kind of the best image of what righteousness looks like, even more so than someone who looks super holy like Mother Teresa or some other nun or monk. But someone who's just out in the world sprinting towards Jesus when they see him. Right? Noah had that kind of mentality and that kind of outlook. And God, being in total control of the flood, makes it limited, because his real goal isn't destruction and death, but instead it's about bringing people back into relationship with him. If you're coming to Revelation on Wednesday nights, you'll see all of these scary and bad things are happening, right? But they're door knocks. You see God knocking a little louder, louder, and louder, and louder. And the flood here then becomes a really big and loud knock, calling people back into relationship with God. Friends, any parting questions or wonders?
You were talking about the sacrifices, but then when you get to Exodus, it just goes into so much detail
About what the sacrifices are.
The meats, what can be sacrificed and how it has to be done.
And on what day.
It just gets to be, okay, we're going to talk about another one. And where they could be done in the temple and how.
I've always looked at that as like bureaucracy taking over.
So when you say God doesn't desire the sacrifices, then why in the world
have all these rules?
Have all this stuff in Exodus?
So Carl, you were in the military, right?
Yes.
Did y'all ever make men shine up shoes?
Once or twice.
Y'all did a lot of shining shoes, don't you?
Yeah.
They make beds in the military?
Yes, they do.
Why?
Because they're told to do it.
That's a good reason, right? Well, I don't understand why I have to shine these shoes. Because I told you to, and that's why. What's the end game? Does the military just need shiny boots for people to march around in?
It's a discipline thing. It's a pride in yourself and discipline to do other things.
But you can walk in unshiny boots, right? They walk just fine. They don't look as nice, but they walk fine.
That's correct.
And the main focus of a boot is to protect your foot from walking, right? But the discipline's important, isn't it? And it's teaching them something about, one, following orders. Because on the battlefield, if someone doesn't follow the commander's order, you can die. That's important. To just, don't ask me why to move from here to there. Just move. Just do it. Right? I think it's kind of the same thing with the sacrifices.
Okay.
It's about instilling some discipline and some order into people, and ordering their life towards God as a way, instead of towards something else.
Making God a part of your life and everything.
Yep.
Everything they did was towards God.
Yeah, you get the I love the Pharisees so much. I mean, most people hate the Pharisees. I really like them. I do. They're great. My kind of people, Pharisees. They've been right oneers, proper, well done service. But they would tithe their dill they grew and the mint they grew and everything. I mean, to the littlest little bit. They were so disciplined and regimented about it. it wasn't wrong that they were disciplined about their tithing. What happened is they forgot to love God with all their mind, all their soul, and all that made them them in doing it. They were just weighing stuff out and giving it away.
There's too much
Just going through
discipline
the
to
motions.
Well, it's like the guy, right? So let's say that Carl's unit is actually in a battle zone, right? And the CO goes nuts about someone's boot getting scuffed up
Seen it?
while they're being shot at. What about your boots? Well, how about we stop getting shot at first and get back to safety, and then we worry about the boots? And you said you've seen it, right?
Yeah, seen it.
Polished boots are great, but let's not get shot at while we're polishing our boots. Because the point's not to have polished boots, right? So you can miss the point and just be polishing your boots while bullets are whizzing by, which is kind of what the Pharisees got into. And I think secretly some of what you would see Israel get into later on as well, when they would do the sacrifices and God would say, I don't enjoy your sacrifices and I do not accept them. How about that?
How about that?
Anything else? Thank you, friends. We'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.